Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the absolute most polarizing, yet completely massive personal finance phenomenons of our time. We're looking at Robert Kiyosaki's 1997 mega hit, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Honestly, whether you've read it cover to cover or literally just seen it sitting on a bookstore shelf, its impact is undeniable. So the actual subtitle of the book asks this seriously provocative question: what the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and middle class do not. And today, we're going to break down the specific financial lessons that make up the tutorial of the book, and then we'll unpack the wild cultural impact and commercial success it managed to pull off.
Section 1. The Tale of Two Dads. The parable at the heart of the book.
Okay, so Kiyosaki basically frames this whole thing as a set of autobiographical parables centered around two father figures. On one side, you have the poor dad. Now, Kiyosaki claims this was his actual biological father, a guy who worked incredibly hard his entire life but sadly never obtained true financial security. On the flip side, we have the rich dad, who is actually his best friend's father. This guy accumulated massive wealth through entrepreneurship and savvy investing. And, for the longest time, the real identity of this rich dad was a total mystery. But eventually, he was identified as Hawaiian hotel developer Richard Kami, who basically served as Kiyosaki's real-life mentor.
Section 2. Boosting Your Financial IQ, the Core Educational Philosophy.
Right, so Kiyosaki constantly emphasizes that increasing your financial intelligence or your financial IQ is the absolute primary key to getting financial independence. Because think about it, it's not just about making a higher salary, right? It's really about the financial literacy and education required to understand money, how it actually works, and crucially, how to make it work for you.
Section 3. Assets and Building Wealth, the Mechanics of Independence.
And this brings us to what is easily the most famous lesson from the book's tutorial, the total redefinition of an asset. The book argues, really strongly, for building wealth by acquiring things that put money directly into your pocket. It sounds incredibly simple, but Kiyosaki's big point is that the middle class constantly buys liabilities, honestly thinking they're assets. By focusing on true assets, we're talking real estate or a business you own, you essentially shift away from that grind of just working your entire life for a standard paycheck.
So this right here is the true rich dad blueprint for breaking out of the middle class cycle. It's all about taking real action, getting into real estate investing, starting businesses, owning businesses, and just relentlessly increasing that financial IQ we talked about earlier. That is the bedrock of the financial education you get from this book.
Moving into Section 4, a global publishing phenomenon, from self-published to household name.
40 million. Before Rich Dad, Poor Dad became a massive household name, Kiyosaki just had some fairly modest business ventures. In 1997, the book was completely self-published. It was literally rejected by every major publisher out there, and initially, even Barnes & Noble refused to carry it. Fast forward to the 20th anniversary edition in 2017, and Kiyosaki estimated a staggering 40 million copies had been sold globally.
So how in the world did it explode like that? Well, the book's reach was massively driven by Kiyosaki doing these incredibly strategic appearances on talk radio and, most importantly, The Oprah Winfrey Show. He actually credits Oprah as having the single biggest influence on his sales. It spread like wildfire, translated into 51 languages, sold across 109 countries, and it sat on the New York Times bestseller list for over 6 years. It went from a totally self-published passion project to an entire franchise of books and educational products.
Section 5. Praise and Heavy Criticism, a Divisive Legacy.
Now, on one hand, this book has received some seriously high praise from very prominent figures. Damon John, the American fashion entrepreneur and investor, straight up calls it one of my favorites. Even Will Smith mentioned that he used the book to teach his son, Jaden, the basics of financial independence. And the institutional endorsements? Just as big. PBS actually aired a 55-minute summary presentation called A Guide to Wealth back in 2006. And they even gave Kiyosaki an Excellence in Education Award in 2005. The success also led to some major literary collaborations, like when Kiyosaki teamed up with Donald Trump to co-author 2 books, including one called Why We Want You to Be Rich. But hold on, because on the flip side, the criticism is incredibly harsh. Competing financial self-help writer John T. Reed definitely does not mince words here. He calls it, quote, one of the dumbest financial advice books I have ever read. Reed actually argues that it's packed with terrible advice, numerous factual errors, and just extremely unlikely accounts of events.
And these critiques definitely go way beyond just competing authors. Reviewer Rob Walker, writing for Slate,
totally echoed those sentiments. He pointed out all these vague claims and argued that the supposedly autobiographical parables were highly fable-like. Basically, Walker criticized the book as being full of nonsense and just leaning on the predictable self-help boilerplate you see in the genre, while taking a lot of issue with Kiyosaki's broad conclusions about Americans and their culture.
Plus, a major sticking point fueling all these critics was the sheer mystery of the foundational story itself, because for years, Kiyosaki kept his mentor's identity completely hidden. Naturally, this led a lot of critics to suspect that no such person ever existed, and that the autobiographical parables were, frankly, entirely fabricated. At least that was the running theory until Richard Kumi was finally identified following his death. So, as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to weigh the book's undeniable massive success against its totally scathing reviews. Are these lessons profound truths of financial intelligence, or are they just predictable self-help wrapped up in a convenient fable? Actually, maybe the ultimate question is this. If a fabricated fable successfully sparks millions of people to finally take control of their financial education, does it even matter? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.